As world leaders express their concerns over Donald Trump's decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, what are the likely ramifications for the rest of the world? Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is in Brussels attending the EU-China Business Summit. What are the priorities for both sides to strengthen ties? And what can the 21st Annual St. Petersburg International Economic Forum achieve in terms of bettering relations between Moscow and other countries in the world? Welcome to The Point. I'm Li Xin. Now, world leaders have been voicing their concerns about U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said China would stand by its responsibilities on climate change and join hands with all parties to tackle it. Former U.S. President Barack Obama accused Trump of rejecting the future. British Prime Minister Theresa May told Trump of her disappointment over the decision, while German Chancellor Angela Merkel said the withdrawal was very regrettable. What will the US's withdrawal from the Paris Accord mean to the world? Will it push other countries more closely together on this issue, or will it curb the momentum of global efforts? I'm pleased to be joined by Mr. Zhao Hai, Research Fellow of the National Strategy Institute at Tsinghua University, and Mr. Lo Ziping, CEO of the World Wildlife Fund China. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Mr. Zhao, now 195 parties signed the Global Climate Change Treaty. Among them, the United States pledged to deliver $3 billion to the so-called Green Climate Fund, of which a third has already been delivered under former U.S. President Barack Obama. Now, Washington also pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 30% below the 2005 levels by 2025. Now the U.S. is withdrawing from the Paris Accord to renegotiate. Is this possible?
Yes, I think this is a long time coming because President Trump has said that repeatedly during his campaign, promising his base that he's going to pull out of the Paris Accord. So this is he's realizing his campaign promises and make good to his base. So and also even before he pulled out of the Paris Accord, he has proposing a new budget for 2018, cutting 31% of the EPA's budget. Also, he's signing executive orders rolling back Obama-era environmental protection regulations. So I think after the weakening of the environmental protection regime in the United States, pulling out of the Paris Accord is the final straw that is destroying Obama's legacy in terms of environmental protection.
Mr. Lo, what was the reaction from your colleagues in your organization upon hearing this announcement?
Well, obviously, all of us in the environmental community, WWF included, are quite disappointed about the announcement, although we see it coming. But more than just disappointment, I think this is also a call for action. This is a moment in history where countries and business and mayors and concerned public should stand together more united than ever for our common vision.
Mr. Zhao, now in his statement, President Trump said after the U.S. withdraws from the Paris Agreement, he would still America remains the world's leader on environmental issues. How could the U.S. lead the world when it cannot even keep its commitment on climate change?
I think this is a first-hand display of the new Trumpism. Trump has displayed this American first ideology during his trip in Europe, and I think he had a bad trip in Europe having a dispute with European country leaders, and he failed to commit the United States to the Paris Accord, and right after he returned, he pulled the U.S. out of it. So even with this his promise that he wanted to renegotiate renegotiating new terms, it's nearly impossible because European countries and China has insisted that the Paris Accord will not be renegotiated. That, I think, reflected Trump's fundamental ideology that the world is not a global community. It's an arena for countries, for corporations, for people to compete in it, which is very different from China's worldview right now. China views the world as a community for common destiny. So I think in this point, it's very hard for the U.S., particularly the Trump administration, to come back and lead the world. Instead, China's stepping up and cooperating with the European Union and championing the next stage for climate change control.
Yeah, well, as you said, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang just made this announcement about China's policy on climate change. Let's take a listen first.
There is a saying in China, our words count and our actions should be successful. China will stand by its responsibility on climate change, and China doesn't stand alone on this issue. Our scientists in this area are in connection with the world and follow climate protection developments very closely.
Now, Mr. Lo, how will the US's withdrawal from the Paris Accord influence China's role in fighting climate change? Some are saying China might be forced to take on the leadership role in that regard, but China might not be willing to do that.
Well, I think as our Premier have said, that China stay committed to the Paris Agreement, and the agreement itself is a global collective effort towards reducing greenhouse gas emission to avoid catastrophic climate change for the common good of everyone on this planet. It would take every country to work together. The burden should not be singled out onto one or two countries. Of course, as one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gas emission in the world, China and the US have been playing very significant leadership role in the lead up to the Paris negotiation. We expect that all the country will stay together, more united than ever, in order to reduce our climate risk in the future.
Mr. Zhao, now Chinese Premier Li Keqiang with his European counterparts are expected to issue a joint statement on the Paris Climate Accord committing to fully implementing the agreement. How do you think the US's withdrawal from this accord is going to affect the global efforts in climate change, and what can China and Europe do to salvage the deal and salvage the efforts, basically?
I think on the one hand, pulling out of the Paris Accord is a very bad decision by the Trump administration. However, on the other hand, the United States is a federal system. On the local level, particularly the state level, California and New York has made steps to remedy these consequences. So, for example, the governor of California will visit China from tomorrow and will probably sign cooperation and other deals with China, further improving its stance in leading the global climate change agenda. So I think over days, the majority of people in the United States still support controlling of the climate change and emission controls. So in the future, more states will be like after the Kyoto Protocol, more states will join together and further commit themselves to the Paris Accord, even though the federal government's quitting that accord.
However, that message coming from the White House is indeed very discouraging. Now, Mr. Lo, what kind of negative influence could this announcement have on the United States, or basically on the world in terms of wildlife protection?
Well, see, even with the announcement of the withdrawal, there is still a strong support from the business community, the regional political leaders in the United States to stay firm with the Paris Accord. If the United States, because of its announcement, will be reducing its effort in combating climate change, then we may see a situation where the negative impact of climate change will not be mitigated, slowed down as we would like it to be, as outlined by the Paris Agreement. Take one example. We will have more extreme weather events. We will have more rapid acceleration of glacier melting in both the Arctic and the Antarctica, specifically for the wildlife. I can cite one example. Scientists are saying that with the current rate of warming, coral reefs of the entire planet may risk extinction, massive extinction by 2050. So what we are deciding today have a conditioning consequences for the fate of both human beings and wildlife of our planet.
But President Trump just doesn't seem to believe in that. How can he be convinced, or how can he be persuaded? Is there any possibility in that? Mr. Lo,
well,
briefly.
I think the the scientists of the world on climate change has been coming into very strong consensus about the risk that we are facing. Mitigating those risks is of prime priority right now. We just cannot risk the chance.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lo Ziping, the CEO of WWF China, and Mr. Zhao Hai, Research Fellow from the National Strategy Institute of Tsinghua University. And here is my point. I was listening to a conservative radio station in the United States, and I was shocked to hear how opinionated the host was while doing an interview with a guest on this issue. His guest was a mayor of a coastal U.S. city who believes in climate change. But the guest could barely finish his sentence before he would get interrupted. When he was not interrupted, the host would make so much noise with his nose that one could barely hear what the guest was saying. So where was the so-called free press and freedom? And if you look at the questions the host was asking, you understand why President Trump's decision on the accord was not a surprise. The host asked why the U.S. should give money to countries such as China or India who are getting away with carbon emissions. Come on, do some homework. First of all, China is doing a lot and will do even more in fighting climate change. Greenpeace has said China's coal use has been falling for 3 consecutive years. Secondly, the United States is the biggest polluter if you accumulate all the carbon dioxide that the country has emitted since the Industrial Revolution, which is poignant since this substance stays in the atmosphere for over 100 years. Sadly, it was not just the conservative media that were putting their heads in the sand. The liberal ones, too, are asking the same ignorant questions. Such media has done the U.S. public a disservice, sowing the seeds for populist politics and sentiments that we see today. So long as this doesn't change, the world is in store for more shocking news in the future. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is in Brussels. He made the remarks in the speech at the EU-China Business Summit, emphasizing China's stance on multilateralism and strengthening ties between China and Europe. Now, Europe has been China's largest trading partner, and China has been Europe's second largest trading partner. With more and more cooperation between the two sides, there are still, however, some disagreements. How can we build a better framework to boost bilateral communication? I'm pleased to be joined from Munich by Dr. Sabine Strick, arbitrator of the China International Economic and Trade Arbitration Commission, or CTAC, and Dr. Jing Men, director of the EU-China Research Center at the College of Europe in Brussels. Welcome to the show, ladies. Dr. Strick-Kellerer, now you have been working on trade between China and European countries. From what you have seen, how is the market looking at the moment? Are things progressing, stagnant, or going backwards?
Thank you very much, Liu Xin, for having me on your show. I'm very pleased to be here. We see a visit by Premier Li Keqiang, which is very welcome in Europe and in Germany. We see that he meets partners with a mature partnership where we can, as you say, talk difficulties and differences and also seek common solutions. So how is the business community looking at it at the moment? I think my co-speaker will tell you more about the most recent EU Chamber of Commerce survey on businesses. But when I listen to Premier Li Keqiang and our European leaders, we can see that they're all on the road to improving relationships. And our question is, what does it mean for business? I think we talk a lot about innovation, and that also in climate change and how we can improve that. And we have different strategies and different industrial policies. And I can elaborate if you want, but I think we will find a common ground here, even though the systems differ.
Now, Dr. Men, now what?
So if you look at the industrial policies.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Go ahead. No, I mean,
Okay.
if you want to look at the industrial policy, that was the key topic yesterday when Li Keqiang visited Berlin. The key topic was innovation. Germany has the program Industry 4.0, which is a platform. It's basically a platform for the companies, so it's not a top-down policy, it's a platform. China has its policy Made in China 2025, which is the government deciding top-down what the business should look like, what business segments should be prioritized, and how the world market leaders should be developed. At the same time, Li Keqiang said that in China we have a boom of grassroots innovation. So that's very similar to Germany. It's into Europe. We have startups, we have startup companies who want to cooperate. So if we look from bottom up, we have a very similar situation for companies competing for the best know-how and the best knowledge. And when we look at top down from the government, we might have a different structure how we deal with it.
Now, Dr. Min, one of the top priorities of Chinese Premier Li Keqiang and German Chancellor Angela Merkel's meeting is to talks on China-EU investment agreement to enrich bilateral ties. Now, how are the talks going so far, and how will China and the EU benefit from this agreement?
For bilateral investment agreement, up till now there has been 13 rounds of negotiations between the EU and China, but there are still a lot of substances that need to be settled down. Therefore, although having been negotiated between the two sides for several years, up till now there is still no bilateral investment agreement. But on the other hand, we know that between the EU member states and China, currently, of course, due to the Brexit reason, we have still, let's say, 27 member states, but most of them have bilateral investment agreement. Most of them are outdated to a certain degree because now Chinese investment has been developing so rapidly in recent years, particularly for 2016, about 40 billion euros have been invested from Chinese side to the European side, which made about 70% increase compared to the previous year. And therefore, for the European Union and China both realize that it's really necessary to have an upgraded overall comprehensive investment agreement between the EU and China level, particularly after the Lisbon Treaty that has been concluded in the EU. And that's why now they are still committed to the negotiation.
Dr. Strichter-Kellerer, now we've heard Dr. Min just telling us China's investment last year in the EU amounted to some 40 billion euros, and that's, if my statistics is correct, that's 5 times as much as the EU's investment in China. Some have accused China of obtaining high-end technology from European countries through its investments, while simultaneously raising the bar for European investment in China. What do you think of this accusation, and how do you think the investment between the two sides can be lessened?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not very fond of numbers. The sizes of our two countries are so totally different that the numbers on investment is not really what drives me. What drives me much more is the question, do we really have a fair and equal playing field, or do we have an asymmetric market field? That's exactly what you refer to. And we want to be a very, very open market. We want to continue to be very open for Chinese investments, and we're hoping that China is so as well. You mentioned that China might have deteriorated in opening up its market. I think that's probably not the point I would make. I would say its gradual opening did just not speed up. We had the opening since admission to WTO, and thereafter we had even more opening. But somehow it slows down, and we know the worries. We know the questions European companies are asking, which are basically under the Made in China 2025 policy. Does really China want to protect its own industry more than its foreign industry? Does it want to create national champions before the European companies have the opportunity for fair market competition? I want to come back what Li Keqiang said yesterday in Berlin.
Briefly,
if I may
please.
just add that, because that was a really, really very interesting point.
Please.
He said that China made progress first, that they established a negative list for investment, which we understand, which should be reduced and reduced, which means the businesses where I cannot invest in. So this is a government policy. Again, it's top-down driven. But he also mentioned that China has to do it slowly, and China does not want monopolies.
Okay, it's a good point.
I like that very much, because this is a legal term.
Let me come to...
It's after you enter the market.
Sure.
After you freely enter the market, you will then be subject to anti-competition and anti-monopoly laws.
Let me
so
put the final question to Dr. Min,
that
please.
Process.
We have really running out of time, but Dr. Min, I want to hear your quick response to what we have been discussing. Exactly what are the obstacles to creating more balanced bilateral investment between China and the EU? Very briefly, please.
Well, indeed, from the EU side, there are quite a lot of concerns, particularly about the level playing field, about market access in China. Indeed, in China, there is a negative list that some of the sectors which are not fully open to the European investors. But as you just discussed, that China takes a more incremental space, and of course, it takes into consideration of the current situation of Chinese industrial level, Chinese technological level, and the level of the enterprises running in the market environment. And that's why this approach, this incremental approach, will still be kept somehow in the future. And of course, from the European side, people hope that this speed can be speeded up, can be faster, so that there will be a more equal cooperation between the two sides.
Thank you very much, ladies. I have to leave it there. That was Dr. Sabine Strichter-Kellerer, arbitrator of the China International Economic and Trade Arbitration Commission, and Dr. Jing Min, director of EU-China Research Center at the College of Europe in Brussels. Now, Russia is hosting the 21st annual St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, or SPIEF, and the theme this year is bringing balance to the global economy. Funded in 1997, SPIEF is an international platform to discuss key economic issues facing Russia. Among the issues being discussed this year are Russia's economic growth since sanctions were imposed by the West. Now, joining me to analyze the different aspects of this forum is from Boston, Professor Ravi Ramamurthy at the Northeast University, who is an expert on innovation and strategy in emerging markets, and from London, Ms. Lilith Gevorgyan, senior economist for Russia and the CIS at the consultancy IHS Markit. Ms. Gevorgyan, first of all, how should we understand the theme of this year's forum being bringing balance to the global economy? Since Russia is being isolated by the West with sanctions, how important do you think this theme is for Russia and indeed to other countries?
Well, I think the main theme of this year's summit is to argue that there should not be sanctions on trade, that politics and economics have to be separated, that through pursuit of trade and economic relationship there will be more stability in the world. In terms of the rebalancing, again, to be honest, it's not very clear what the Russian view is, but I suppose that in terms of rebalancing, it is about addressing sort of large surplus, current account surpluses or deficits, and looking to developing the domestic demand in those countries that have large current account surpluses, currency policies as well, exchange rate policies. So. But going back to the first point, I think it will be about arguing that despite the sanctions, Russia is doing relatively well in terms of exiting recession, and arguing that it has multilateral economic relations with various countries in the world.
Mm-hmm. Professor Ramamurthy, now relations between Russia and the United States deteriorated in 2014 over the Ukraine crisis, and the US imposed several rounds of sanctions against it. Last year, the Obama administration decided not to send any representative to the forum. However, this year, President Trump confirmed he has sent his ambassador to Russia to this forum, but he will not be a speaker at the event. Does this signal a revival in US-Russia dialogue, at least in terms of business cooperation?
I think it does. I think these are small changes that are starting to happen, and at the grassroots level, I think you're seeing greater participation by U.S. companies in the program. I understand more companies, American companies, will be participating in this year's program than in the past years. And even though at the official level you're not seeing a deep engagement, I think we're seeing the starting of a process by which at least companies can start talking to each other, companies starting to talk to Russian companies in anticipation of the day when some of the sanctions might be lifted. I think at the time the program was initially put together a few months back, the organizers may have expected that U.S.-Russia relationship would have hit the reset button, as some people expected. That hasn't quite happened, but I think we're beginning to see the rumblings of some changes.
Professor Ramamurthy, now this meeting also comes after Indian Prime Minister Modi's visit to Germany, Spain, and now Prime Minister Modi is making an appearance at the forum. How do you look at the importance of economic ties with Russia to India?
I think in the case of India, the political relationship is probably ahead of the economic relationship. India and Russia have had long ties since the Cold War days, and Russia was a major supporter of India's development in the early years after India became independent. So there is a friendship and a certain trust and relationship. But the economic relationship between India and Russia is actually almost trivial. It's something like $8 to $10 billion a year of trade for two giant economies. So it should be a whole lot more than it is. But the fact that Prime Minister Modi is coming in person and as one of the special guests at this event indicates that he is interested in ramping up that relationship. Now, they have signed, I believe, some agreements, or will be signing very soon, to cooperate in the nuclear energy sphere and also in modernizing the Indian railways and so on. But I think the hope is that in the next few years, trade between India and Russia and some of the other Eurasian economies could increase by a factor of 4 or 5.
Yeah, Ms. Kevorkian, I have about 1 minute left, but I really want to find out your expectation of the relationship between India and Russia going forward, both in terms of economy and in terms of political relations.
Well, I would slightly disagree with your guest, if I may. I think there has been, there is a long history of political relationship. However, the economic relationship has thus far failed to materialize, and I don't think it's going to be a sort of significant jump from now onwards. It's quite limited in some ways. Russia is exporting what it can, which is sort of civil nuclear expertise and also arms trade. This is the main part of this relationship. Other than that, especially when it comes to Russia, its economy, it's still it's not doing well despite exiting recession. In terms of investment destination, it is still under sanctions, and despite the talk, there hasn't really been any structural reforms and changes that will make this country attractive. And I do agree that the relationship with the US is much more thorny, and to make things worse, it just comes against the backdrop of fresh sanctions against at least 9 Russian companies imposed by the US government. So there's a lot of talk between Russia and India, or also between Russia and China, but we really have to see whether this will materialize and diversify away from energy cooperation and arms deals.
Thank you very much, Professor Ravi Ramamurthy from Northeastern University and Ms. Lilith Kevorkian, Senior Economist from IHS Markit. And that's it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Twitter or follow our Facebook page using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thank you very much. I'll see you on Monday. You got the point.